Not all archaeological discoveries are equal. Even the most trivial of finds can shed new light on our ancestors and the way they lived, but some discoveries are more important and game-changing than others. This video is all about those discoveries. These aren't just tombs or pieces of pottery, they're phenomenal finds that permanently changed the way we think about the past, and in turn, how we think about ourselves in the modern age. Let's get started. It's hard to overstate the importance of the fabled Rosetta Stone. Without its discovery, we'd probably still be struggling to interpret what the ancient Egyptians meant by the hieroglyphics they left on their tombs and monuments. After the country was conquered by Alexander the Great over 2,300 years ago, Greek became the official language of the land, and attempts were made to destroy the Egyptian language that existed before. Not everyone could speak Greek, though, so when Ptolemy V wanted to declare himself as the nation's real pharaoh in 196 BCE, he commissioned the creation of the Rosetta Stone and ordered his proclamation to be etched upon it in both Greek and hieroglyphics. That meant that when we discovered the stone in 1799, we could use our knowledge of Greek to translate the Egyptian words and finally gain an understanding of the language. Our knowledge of the Egypt of the past started with the finding of this stone. Today, it's still considered as one of the most important archaeological artifacts in the world, and the Egyptian nation is campaigning to have it returned to them from England. It's an unfortunate fact of life that humans sometimes find themselves trapped in peat bogs, are unable to free themselves, and lose their lives there. When a so-called bog body was found in Denmark in April 1952, it was initially believed that it belonged to a peat cutter called Red Christian, who disappeared from the area in 1887. Radiocarbon dating of the corpse told a very different story. This body wasn't from the recent past. It was positively ancient, now known as Grobble Man because of the bog's proximity to the village of Grobble. This well-preserved body belongs to someone who perished over 2,300 years ago, during the Iron Age. What confuses experts about the body is that its hands show no sign of the roughness that would come with manual labor, which would be expected for a civilian of this era. He was around 30 years old, stood 5 feet and 9 inches tall, and based on his stomach contents, he might have been a vegetarian. We think of veganism and vegetarianism as modern-age trends, but perhaps they're far older than we believe them to be. Almost everybody has heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but how much do you know about them? Did you know, for example, that they were discovered by accident, and that someone once tried to sell them in the classifieds section of a newspaper? The famous scrolls were found by teenage Bedouin goat farmers in the ancient town of Qumran in Israel in 1947, hidden away inside a cave on the shore of the Dead Sea. Realizing that the leather scrolls might be significant, the farmers sold them to a local antique dealer who got in touch with experts and found out that they were over 2,000 years old. That prompted a frenzy of exploration and the eventual discovery of over 800 manuscripts. The collection was broken up and sold around the world, including through a 1954 listing in the Wall Street Journal. The origins of the texts are mysterious, but they're believed to have been written by a devout Jewish sect known as the Essenes somewhere around 2,100 years ago. Within them is what's thought to be the oldest known manuscript of the Old Testament, including writings that don't appear in the official version of the book. Tantalizingly, one of the scrolls is written in copper and seems to detail the location of an enormous ancient treasure, one that treasure hunters are still looking for to this day. Not every ancient warrior left the battlefield with their helmet still in their possession. Some of them got left behind either through accident or through burial. Not all of them are historically notable, but this bronze Greek helmet is. That's because it's 2,500 years old, and it was found in the Russian district of Taman, far from where any such object should be. The only helmet that looks anything like this that's turned up in former Soviet territory before was found during the 19th century close to Kiev. This Corinthian-style helmet is like nothing previously unearthed in the northern region of the Black Sea area. You'll find depictions of helmets like these on numerous Greek vases, and also on the statue of Athena, but finding real-world examples happens much less often. There's still some debate about whether they were used for military or ceremonial purposes. The helmets are like a bucket, and would severely impede both the vision and the range of movement of anybody who wore one. The narrow slots for the eyes would have made looking to the left or right impossible, so if they were worn in battle, the warriors inside them would have to face the enemy straight on. The Tomb of Sunken Skulls sounds like it ought to be the name of an Indiana Jones movie, but it's actually a genuine archaeological discovery made in Sweden in 2009. Nobody knows for sure what went on here, but it's a very grisly place. You won't find any complete skeletons here, just a series of human skulls impaled on stakes around 8,000 years ago. The site was discovered by accident during the construction of a new railway line close to the shore of Lake Vättern. It's possible that all of the unfortunate owners of the skulls were related. There are 11 of them, and the group includes men, women, and even children. To make things even more gruesome, all of the adult skulls are missing their jawbones. Some of the skulls show signs of burning, which might imply that a ceremony of some kind was held after they were mounted on their stakes. They were then buried beneath a small lake, which explains the sunken part of the tomb's name. Is this the site of a brutal ancient massacre? Or is it a burial ritual that we don't understand? Perhaps we'll never know for sure. We already know that the ancient Romans could be pretty brutal when they wanted to. But could it be possible that they committed mass murder against infants on purpose? That's a question we must now ask ourselves after the discovery of a mass infant grave below an ancient Roman bathhouse in the old seaport of Ashkelon in Israel. It's now considered the most significant mass infant grave ever discovered, and might be the final confirmation of a long-held theory that the Romans were prone to bouts of mass infanticide. They didn't believe that infants were fully formed humans, and so they didn't consider leaving one to die to be immoral. Part of this is down to the Roman legend that both Romulus and Remus were abandoned by the great god Mars, and then raised by wolves before going on to found the mighty city of Rome. If it was good enough for the gods, it was good enough for the people. There might be a different explanation, though. The bathhouse also appears to have been a brothel. Might all of these abandoned children, of which there are almost 100, actually have been disposed of below the building by the women who worked inside it? Travel to Laos and you'll find one of the world's most fascinating unexplained archaeological sites in the shape of the Plain of Jars. They're all over the country's highlands, mostly focused on the Jiangkuang Plain. All of them are shaped out of solid rock and range in size between 3 feet tall and 10 feet tall. The largest of them weighs over 10 tons. It's never easy to date rock monuments, but they're believed to have been made around 2,000 years ago, with some estimates going as far as 2,500 years. Nobody so far has been able to prove what the jars were used for, but the most common accepted theory is that they were used to house the remains of the dead after funeral rites. The bodies would be placed into the jars, which presumably had lids at one point in the distant past, until the decomposition process was complete and only the skeleton remained. The skeleton would then be retrieved and buried elsewhere. The discovery of personal effects, including clothing, jewelry, and stone carvings around the area of the jars, might back up this idea. When experts and scientists can't explain the purpose of an object or a location, tales of the supernatural tend to creep in to fill the void. That's what happened with the mysterious Roman tunnels of Baiae, which you'll find in the Campania region of Italy. Once upon a time, this was a seaside resort for the wealthiest inhabitants of Rome, but volcanic activity in the area brought an abrupt end to the fun that used to happen here. It wasn't until 1932 that an archaeologist notes that there were hidden tunnels in the abandoned resort, and not until the 1960s that another archaeologist, Robert Paget, decided they were worth exploring. After spending 10 years exploring the elaborate tunnel system, he concluded that he'd found the Cave of the Sibyl, which was recorded in the writings of ancient Roman authors, but had until then been considered a myth. The tales say that the tunnels were home to a powerful prophetess named Amalthea, who could predict the future and wrote her prophecies on leaves, which she left at the entrance to her cave. The entire tunnel network appears to have been designed to replicate the myth of the Greek underworld, so whoever designed them clearly had an interest in the supernatural. There are no signs of the remains of Amalthea at the site yet, but people are still looking. Until their rediscovery in 2011, nobody had seen the Chariots of Shao for over 2,700 years. They're the centerpiece of a hugely elaborate and seemingly significant burial site in Luoyang, China, which is still being excavated today. This is one of very few archaeological discoveries from the time of China's Shao dynasty, and while we haven't been able to identify the human occupant of the tomb, we've at least been able to conclude that they were extremely important. The weaponry, pottery, and of course the chariots they were buried with would all support the idea that this is the final resting place of either a great leader or a mighty warrior. There are 5 chariots buried at the site, accompanied by the remains of 12 horses. The chariots are barely more than petrified ash after spending so many years underground, but the skeletal remains of the horses are still in the exact same position they were in at the time of their burial. It doesn't appear that they were still alive at the time of their burial, but the cause of their death remains unknown. Sadly, it's likely that they were killed for the express purpose of being placed inside the tomb. You might not know of the tomb of Qin Shi Huang in China by name, but you'll almost certainly be familiar with the most famous occupants of it. They are the many finely detailed clay sculptures that make up the world-renowned Terracotta Army. The discovery of the tomb was hailed as one of the greatest and most significant archaeological finds of the 20th century when it was unearthed in 1974, and it's difficult to disagree with that assessment. Aside from the pyramids of Egypt, this might be the most lavish burial ever awarded to any leader in history. That's understandable in this case, though. Qin Shi Huang, who died over 2,200 years ago, was the first ever emperor of China. We don't understand everything there is to know about the site, but it's generally thought that the clay soldiers are intended to represent an army to guard and serve the emperor during the afterlife. There's a very large mystery at the site, though, and that's the fact that the body of the emperor himself isn't present. There are no signs that the grave was ever looted, so the absence of the body is inexplicable. When is a statue not a statue? Well, how about when it's actually a corpse? That was the astonishing secret that was revealed when restoration work was performed on a 1,000-year-old Chinese statue of a sitting Buddha in 2015. The owner of the statue took it to an expert to restore it, but the expert quickly realized there was a cavity inside the icon and promptly called for backup. An X-ray was subsequently performed on the sculpture, revealing a human occupant in a cross-legged position. Further investigation revealed that he was wrapped in paper and covered with ancient Chinese script. From that, we know that he was a monk named Li Quan, and he almost certainly mummified himself on purpose, according to a rare and ancient tradition that involved following a strict diet and then ingesting poison to ward off maggots. The process was difficult, and any monk who achieved it was usually revered by their peers. It appears that the statue was built around the remains of the monk approximately 200 years after he passed away, so it's likely that the body was exhibited in Buddhist temples without the decorative outer shell prior to that point. This unusual object has now become a museum piece. Liquid mercury isn't a substance you'd want to mess around with, but it might be a good way to ensure that nobody ever comes to raid your tomb after you've died. In 2015, archaeologists discovered a river of the fluid running below the Temple of the Feathered Serpent in the ancient city of Teotihuacan, Mexico, and they believe that it may lead to a series of royal tombs. If they do, a very old mystery might finally have been solved. The kings of Teotihuacan were among the most powerful rulers of the land here in pre-Hispanic times, and yet their tombs have never been discovered. This potentially deadly river might be the reason why. The tunnel that leads to the river was built somewhere around 1,800 years ago, and is at the back of a series of chambers that include jaguar skeletons, jade statues, and boxes of ornate shells. Mercury was important to Mesoamerican ceremonies. It was used to coat jade statues and also paint the bodies of royalty. Reaching the end of the river won't be easy because of the threat posed by the mercury, but experts will get there one day. Hopefully, the reward will be worth all the work. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!